The Albanese Labor government is reportedly looking at some electoral reform, but typically they're looking at all the wrong ideas.
Now, in Canberra, there's been some talk in the last 24 hours about the idea of extending the term for federal MPs from 3 years to 4.
Well, believe it or not, the Prime Minister is openly talking about having another referendum.
All right, folks, just when you thought we'd had enough referendums to last a lifetime, our very own Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has dropped a bit of a bombshell. He's announced the beginnings of a process for longer parliamentary terms. Now, for some, that might sound like a bit of a yawn fest, a dry political discussion for the eggheads in Canberra, but trust me, this one's got more twists and turns than a country road after a few too many beers, and it could change the very fabric of our democracy. See, our current system has us heading to the polls every 3 years. Like clockwork. It's a bit like having a new batch of snags on the barbie every few minutes. Just when you get comfortable, it's time for another round. But Albo's talking about stretching that out, potentially to 4 years. And to do that, mate, you guessed it, it'll likely need another referendum. That's right, another trip to the ballot box, another national debate, and another chance for the political class to tell us what's good for us. Now, the official line is all about stability and good governance. They reckon 3 years isn't enough time to get anything done, that politicians are always campaigning instead of governing. And there's a bit of truth to that, isn't there? It's like trying to build a sandcastle while the tide's constantly coming in. But there's another side to this coin, a side that makes you wonder if this is really about us or about them. Is it about making Australia a better place or just making life easier for the politicians? We're going to dive deep into this proposal, unpack what it really means for you, the average Aussie, and look at the hidden agendas that might be lurking beneath the surface. We'll explore why some are pushing for this and why others are raising red flags faster than a lifesaver at Bondi. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll have a clearer picture of whether this is a fair go for democracy or just another power grab. So buckle up, because this political ride is about to get interesting. Before we expose the shocking truth about Albanese's push for longer parliamentary terms and the potential referendum that could change Australia forever, join our Patreon. We're the resistance, exposing the political blunders and the systemic failures that mainstream media often glosses over. Link in the description. Our current 3-year parliamentary term is enshrined in the Constitution, Section 28 to be precise. It's been the rhythm of our political life since Federation. Every 3 years, like clockwork, we get to have our say, kick out the bums, or give them another go. It's meant to keep politicians on their toes, accountable to the people and responsive to our needs. A bit like a short leash, if you will. But for years, there's been a chorus of voices, mostly from within the political class, arguing that 3 years just isn't enough. They reckon it leads to a constant election cycle where governments are always in campaign mode, afraid to make tough decisions for fear of upsetting the voters. They argue that longer terms, say 4 years, would allow governments to implement their policies properly, to think long term, and to focus on governing rather than politicking. Prime Minister Albanese himself has been a long-time advocate for 4-year terms. He's argued that it would lead to greater stability and allow for more effective governance.
I support fixed 4-year terms, always have. Referendums are pretty hard to carry in this country.
And he's not alone. Leaders from both sides of politics, including opposition leader Peter Dutton, have expressed support for the idea at various times. It's one of those rare issues where there's a bit of bipartisan agreement, which, let's be honest, is rarer than a blue moon in Canberra. The argument goes that with a longer runway, governments could tackle big, complex issues that require more than just a quick fix. They could implement reforms that might be unpopular in the short term, but beneficial in the long run. It's about giving them the space to govern, without the constant pressure of the next election breathing down their necks. Sounds reasonable, doesn't it? But as with most things in politics, the devil's in the detail, and there's always another side to the story. The catch, of course, is that changing the parliamentary term from 3 to 4 years isn't something the government can just decide on a whim. It requires a change to the Constitution, and that means, you guessed it, a referendum. That's where you, the Australian people, get to have your say. And after the recent Voice referendum, the appetite for another national vote might be a bit thin on the ground, like a snag at the end of a long BBQ. Albanese has been a bit coy about the timing and nature of this process. He's ruled out a referendum on fixed 4-year terms this term, but he's clearly got it in his sights for the future. The government's recent landslide victory, which saw them secure a second consecutive term, might give them the confidence to push for such a significant change. They might see it as a mandate, a sign that the Australian people are ready for a bit of a shake-up. But referendums are tricky beasts in Australia. They're notoriously hard to win, especially if there's any hint of a hidden agenda or if the public feels like they're being railroaded. The last successful referendum was way back in 1977, and since then, a string of proposals have gone down in flames. So while the idea of longer terms might have some merit, getting the Australian people to agree to it is a whole different ballgame.
Referendums are pretty hard to carry in this country, and opportunism kicks in. And unless you have bipartisan support, then it's not going to be supported.
It's not just about the length of the term either. A referendum on this issue would open up a whole can of worms about our political system. Should elections be fixed? Should we have simultaneous elections for both houses of parliament? These are big questions, and they would spark a national debate that would be as lively as a pub brawl on a Saturday night. And the government would need to convince a majority of voters in a majority of states that this change is genuinely in their best interests, not just the politicians. Now, let's put on our cynical hats for a moment, shall we? While the arguments for stability and good governance sound fair enough, there's a nagging suspicion that longer terms might also be about giving politicians more power and giving us, the voters, less say. If governments have a longer period between elections, does that mean they become less accountable? Do they become more arrogant, more out of touch, and more likely to push through unpopular policies without fear of immediate reprisal? Some critics argue that 3-year terms, while perhaps a bit frantic, are a crucial check on government power. They force politicians to stay connected to the electorate, to listen to their concerns, and to be mindful of the consequences of their actions. A longer term, they argue, could lead to a more insulated political class, less responsive to the will of the people, and more focused on their own agendas. And let's not forget the cost. Referendums are expensive exercises, costing millions of taxpayer dollars.
We also remember that one of the reasons why people were so annoyed that the whole thing took place was because it apparently cost the best part of $500 billion to actually stage.
Is this really the best use of our money, especially when we're facing a cost of living crisis, a housing crisis, and a whole raft of other pressing issues? Or is it just another vanity project for a government that wants to leave its mark on history? There's also the question of trust. After the recent Voice referendum, where many felt the government didn't adequately address concerns or provide enough detail, there's a sense of fatigue and distrust in the air. Pushing for another referendum so soon, especially on an issue that directly benefits politicians, could be seen as tone-deaf and further erode public confidence in the political process. It's a bit like asking for another slice of cake when you haven't even finished the first one.
4-year terms, yes or no? Mr Dutton.
I support 4-year terms.
Prime Minister?
Yes, but they'll never support a referendum.
So what's the go with Albanese's process for longer parliamentary terms? It's a proposal that, on the surface, sounds reasonable, even beneficial. But scratch beneath the surface and you find a whole lot of questions about power accountability, and the future of our democracy. It's a debate that's going to be as important as any we've had in recent times, and it's one that every Aussie needs to pay attention to. Because ultimately, this isn't just about how long politicians sit in Canberra. It's about how much say we, the people, have in how our country is run. It's about whether we want a political system that keeps our leaders on a tight leash, or one that gives them more rope. And it's about whether we believe that more stability for politicians automatically translates into a better deal for us. This is a conversation that needs to happen openly and honestly, without the usual political spin and smoke and mirrors. We need to weigh up the pros and cons, consider the potential consequences, and decide what kind of democracy we want for Australia. Because if we don't, if we just let the politicians decide, then we might wake up one day to find that the rules of the game have changed, and not necessarily for the better. The mainstream media won't tell you the full truth about Albanese's push for longer parliamentary terms, or the potential implications for our democracy. They won't expose the hidden agendas or the risks of giving politicians more power. Join our Patreon for uncensored investigations into the political manoeuvres that threaten our nation's future. This isn't just about parliamentary terms. It's about our freedom. It's about whether we will be a nation where the people truly have the power, or one where the political class calls all the shots. The choice is ours, but we need to be informed and we need to be vigilant. To see the latest Australian crisis, click this video here.